Ethan had built his empire before 30. News channels called him the golden mind of Manhattan. Luxury cars lined his private garage. Assistants buzz around like bees guarding a hive of wealth. And the city bowed at his name. Yet, as he stood in that high-rise of glass and pride, it didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like a trap. His reflection stared back from the window, rain streaking across it like tears he'd forgotten how to shed. Money fixes everything, he once told his late father. Feelings just slow you down. He had believed that with every deal signed, every life outbid. But tonight, as thunder cracked through the skyline, the emptiness in his chest grew louder than the storm. He turned, eyes falling on a single envelope among the chaos, yellowed, fragile, and handwritten. His name on it, in a trembling script he hadn't seen since childhood. To Ethan, from Grace. His fingers hesitated. Grace had been the only person who believed he had a heart before the world started calling him ruthless. She worked as his housekeeper when he was a teenager, more of a mother figure than his own. He'd promised to take care of her someday. But promises, like people, had become disposable to him. He ripped the envelope open. Inside lay a note and a faded photograph. Young Ethan, dirt on his cheeks, holding a stray puppy, with Grace smiling beside him. The note read, "Never let success turn you into someone the boy in this photo wouldn't recognize." Ethan laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Too late for that," he muttered. He crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash. But as it hit, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then darkness swallowed the penthouse. "Power outage," he whispered, trying to sound logical. But the air shifted, colder, heavier. From somewhere deep within the blackness, a whisper floated out. "Ethan, why did you throw it away?" He froze. The voice was faint, trembling, a woman's. Familiar. His pulse raced. "Who's there?" The silence answered with a hum. The storm's wind pressing against glass, the faint echo of his own breath. He reached for his phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating scattered papers, until it stopped on the photo, the one from Grace's envelope. It now lay upright on the floor, perfectly centered, staring at him. "No," he whispered. He hadn't dropped it like that. He remembered tossing it. Yet it sat there, uncrumpled, pristine. His heart thudded. "Grace!" The wind outside howled her name back. "Grace!" He rubbed his temples. "I'm losing it. I just need sleep." He picked up the photo and shoved it into a drawer. But as he closed it, he caught sight of something written on the inside panel, words that weren't there before. In delicate handwriting, "You forgot who you were." He stumbled back, pulse roaring in his ears. This isn't real. Just then, his phone buzzed. A notification. "Missed call. Grace, 2:47 a.m. His throat tightened. Grace had been dead for 5 years. He had attended her funeral. Or at least, sent flowers. His hands shook as he stared at the screen, disbelief gripping him like iron. He pressed play on the voicemail icon, heart hammering so hard he thought it might stop. "Ethan." Her voice, warm, soft, and unmistakably hers. "Do you remember the boy you used to be?" The phone slipped from his hand and crashed to the floor. Ethan's chest felt like it was collapsing inward. The air in the penthouse grew heavy, pressing down on him like invisible hands. His fingers hovered over the phone, trembling as the screen dimmed to black. No, this is some sick joke," he muttered. He tried to laugh, but his voice cracked halfway through. He turned the phone off, then on again. The call log was gone. No number, no voicemail. Just a faint reflection of his pale face staring back. He backed away, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the thunder outside. His expensive watch blinked midnight blue, 3 a.m. sharp. He pressed both palms to the glass window, breathing fast. Down below, the city lights shimmered in puddles, reflections of lives still awake. And for the first time in years, Ethan wished he wasn't alone. He walked toward the bar, poured himself a drink, and stared at the amber liquid swirling in the glass. His reflection in it looked older than 32. "Get a grip, Ethan. You're not haunted. You're tired," he told himself. Yet deep down, something stayed, the kind of guilt that doesn't vanish with logic. He sat down on the couch, facing the scattered papers, charity budgets, layoffs, termination letters. Every decision that had made him richer had also left someone poorer. And now, all of it stared back, silent but accusing. Then, amid the storm's hum, another sound emerged, faint at first, then sharper. Paper rustling. He turned his head slowly. The trash bin in the corner moved slightly, a wisp of air curling around it. The crumpled letter he'd thrown away was sliding upward, as if being lifted by unseen fingers. It floated out, unfolded midair, and landed neatly beside him. Ethan's hand shook as he picked it up. The handwriting shimmered faintly under the lightning flashes. But now, beneath Grace's old message, new words had appeared. You still have time to change. He blinked hard. No, this isn't happening. He stumbled back, nearly knocking over his drink. Grace is gone, he whispered, almost pleading with the darkness. You can't be here. But the voice came again, closer now, right behind him. Then why do you still keep her photo hidden in your drawer? He spun around, flashlight trembling. No one. The only sound was his quick, uneven breathing. He rushed to the drawer, pulled it open. The photo was gone. In its place was a small silver locket he hadn't seen in years. Grace had given it to him when he graduated high school. He had pawned it long ago. He picked it up slowly, feeling the chill of the metal seep into his palm. When he opened it, the hinge creaked. Inside was the same picture from before, but this time his face in the photo had changed. The boy's eyes were no longer full of innocence. They were hollow, distant, mirroring the man he had become. Lightning flashed again, and in that split second, Ethan saw something reflected in the glass wall, a faint figure standing behind him. Grace. Oh, what looked like her. Pale, translucent, eyes kind but sad. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him. Grace. His voice broke. Why now? Why me? The figure tilted her head gently. Because you finally started listening. The lights flickered back to life. She was gone. Only the echo of her words remained, ringing inside his chest like an unfinished prayer. He sank onto the couch again, tears pricking the edges of his eyes, the kind that never fully fall but still burn. For years, he had silenced his guilt with money, noise, and power. But now, silence itself was the loudest thing in the room. His phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. No number, no name. Just one line. Go back where it began. Ethan stared at it, heartbeat uneven. Where it began, his childhood home. The small neighborhood outside the city, the one he'd left behind when the money came pouring in. He hadn't been there in over a decade. He looked out the window once more. The storm was easing, but something inside him wasn't. He grabbed his car keys. Fine, he whispered. Let's see where this goes. As he opened the door to leave, the lights flickered again. For a moment, the penthouse seemed to breathe, and then came one last whisper, soft but close enough to feel on his skin. Don't run this time. Ethan froze. He swallowed hard and stepped into the hallway. The door shut behind him with a quiet thud, like the closing of a chapter he'd never meant to write. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Write yes and tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think. The drive out to Manhattan felt longer than it used to. The city's skyline faded in the rearview mirror, each light dimming like memories being switched off one by one. Ethan's car cut through the damp highway, wipers dragging the storm from his windshield, but not from his mind. The road signs passed like ghosts. Riverside, Old Brookfield, Haven Street. That last one made his chest tighten. Haven Street, his childhood home. He slowed down, headlights brushing across small, quiet houses wrapped in rain. Nothing here had changed, except him. The cracked sidewalks, the leaning lampposts, the same corner shop with a faded blue awning, all stood still in time, waiting for someone who'd never planned to return. When he parked, the air smelled of wet earth and nostalgia. The house stood in silence at the end of the lane, a crooked mailbox still reading Cole Family. He killed the engine and sat there for a long minute, staring. His reflection in the window stared back like an accusation. He finally stepped out, gravel crunching beneath his shoes. The front gate squeaked when he pushed it open, the same sound he remembered from nights he'd sneak out as a teenager. Except tonight, it sounded more like a sigh. He reached the door. The lock was rusted, but when he turned the knob, it gave way easily, too easily, as if it had been expecting him. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Dust motes floated through the beam of his phone flashlight, swirling like tiny memories refusing to settle. He walked through the narrow hallway, his shoes echoing softly. Family photos lined the wall. His father, stern as ever, his mother, gentle smile frozen forever. And there, at the bottom of the row, little Ethan, holding a puppy in his arms. The same puppy from Grace's photo. A faint sound echoed, something metallic, a faucet dripping in the kitchen. He followed it, his chest tight with a mix of dread and longing. The kitchen was exactly as he remembered. Peeling wallpaper, a cracked ceramic sink, and the faint smell of damp wood. On the counter sat a dusty teacup. He brushed it with his fingers, whispering, "Grace used to wash this every morning." The memory rose like a tide, her humming softly while sunlight poured through the window. She'd always pour 2 cups, even when she was alone. Lightning flashed outside, filling the room with a brief, silver glow, and for that second, he swore he saw a reflection in the window, smiling faintly at him. Then came her voice, quiet, almost fragile. "You used to say you'd make this place new again." He spun around. No one, just the hum of the rain. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "You're not real. You're just guilt talking." But then, from behind him, the sound of something falling, a chair tipped over in the living room. He turned toward it slowly, heart racing. The flashlight beam landed on the floor. An old photo album had fallen open. He crouched and flipped through the pages. Each picture told a story. Birthday cakes, small hand holding bigger ones, Grace sitting by the window sewing clothes that weren't his. And at the very end, one photo that shouldn't have been there. It showed him years later, dressed in a suit, shaking hands with investors at his first company launch. Grace stood at the back, blurred, smiling. But her eyes looked different. Sad. Beneath it, written in her handwriting, "You left, but your soul stayed here." He swallowed hard, throat dry. He could almost feel her presence now, not haunting, but waiting. The air trembled with something unsaid. "Grace," he whispered, "if this is you, what do you want from me?" The lights flickered. The whisper returned. "Remember kindness." He sank into the old couch, head in his hands. The mansion, the cars, the noise, all of it seemed distant now. This was where he'd first learned what love felt like. And this was where he'd first buried it. He sat there, staring at the photo, and for a moment, he felt her warmth, not cold or ghostly, but familiar, forgiving. Ethan didn't move for a long time. The rain had slowed to a whisper outside, and the silence inside the house felt like it was listening. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the photo album resting open on his lap. Each image was a mirror he didn't want to look into. He stood, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and wandered toward the small back room, Grace's room. The door stuck halfway before giving in, releasing a faint breath of lavender and dust. The faint scent hit him like a memory. Everything was still there. Her old wooden dresser, the rocking chair by the window, a thin quilt folded neatly on the bed. A single candle sat on the nightstand, melted halfway down, as though it had burned for someone waiting to come home. He stepped closer, tracing his fingers over the chair's armrest. He remembered her sitting there during his exams, whispering prayers while he studied. He used to laugh at her faith back then. Now, he wished he could borrow even a drop of it. On the dresser, he noticed a small notebook bound in worn leather. It looked fragile, edges curled with time. He hesitated before opening it. The first page carried her handwriting, still graceful despite the years. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I believe souls find ways to speak again, even through pages." Ethan's heart pounded. He turned another page. "I saw the man you were becoming, Ethan. I was proud, but afraid too. Success can make us forget the faces that built us. But I always believed one day you'd remember." He felt his throat tighten. The pages trembled in his hands. Every line felt like a whisper meant only for him. He closed the notebook and leaned against the wall. The house seemed to breathe again, not haunted, just alive, like Grace had never truly left. "I remember now," he said quietly. "I just don't know how to fix what I broke." The candle on the nightstand flickered once, though no wind had touched it. Ethan froze. Then the flame steadied, soft, golden, like a heartbeat. He moved closer and sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. The silence stretched until his phone buzzed again. One message. "You start by listening." No number, no name, just the same calm sentence, glowing faintly on the cracked screen. "Listening to what?" he whispered. "To ghosts." But deep inside, he knew it wasn't about ghosts. It was about the people he'd ignored, the voices he'd silenced, his employees, his friends, the charities he'd abandoned for profit. He stood abruptly, eyes red. He walked back to the living room, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. The world outside felt different now, softer, like it was giving him another chance. As he stepped out onto the porch, he caught sight of a neighborhood kid, maybe 10 years old, standing under the rain, trying to shield a cardboard box with his jacket. Ethan called out, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" The boy turned, startled. "There's a kitten," he said, pointing to the box. "It's cold. I don't have anywhere to take it." Something cracked open in Ethan's chest, something small but alive. Without thinking, he rushed over, knelt beside the boy, and picked up the trembling kitten. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get it warm." The boy smiled, relieved, and followed him inside. Ethan grabbed an old towel from the kitchen, dried the kitten gently, and handed the boy a cup of warm milk. "What's your name?" "Leo," the boy said shyly. "Thanks, mister." Ethan smiled faintly. "No, thank you." For the first time in years, the word thank you didn't sound like a transaction. It sounded like truth. As the kitten purred softly against his palm, Ethan looked toward Grace's empty chair by the window. The candle still burned, brighter now. He could almost feel her watching, proud but silent. The house no longer felt empty. It felt right. And though he couldn't explain why, Ethan whispered, "I'll make it right this time, Grace. I promise." The candle's flame flickered once more, like an answer. The morning came slow and gray, sunlight struggling to break through the heavy clouds that still lingered after the storm. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat by the window, the kitten curled on his lap, Leo asleep on the couch wrapped in Grace's old quilt. The house smelled faintly of dust and warmth, a scent that felt more like home than any penthouse ever did. Ethan watched the candle, now burned nearly to the base. Its tiny flame danced like it had its own rhythm, a heartbeat of its own. He thought about Grace's words, "You still have time to change." He whispered, "But where do I even start?" The answer came in the quiet way morning always answers, not with sound, but with stillness. He stood and walked to the kitchen, rummaging through drawers, searching for his phone charger. He found it near the notebook and plugged the phone in. As it flickered to life, dozens of notifications poured in, missed calls, urgent messages from board members, angry emails from investors. He stared at the screen. The empire he'd built was still running, but without him, it was already trembling. The company had released hundreds of employees last week. There were news articles questioning his integrity, his leadership. For a man who once ruled with fear, now even fear had abandoned him. He sighed, pocketed the phone, and turned back toward the sleeping boy. Leo stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, smiling sleepily. "Morning, champ," Ethan said gently. "You hungry?" The boy nodded. Ethan opened the old fridge, empty, except for a half bottle of milk and a jar of jam. He chuckled softly. "Well, looks like breakfast is going to be creative." A few minutes later, the two of them sat on the porch, sharing bread and milk. The sky was pale, washed clean by the night. Leo petted the kitten, who meowed between bites. "You live around here?" Ethan asked. Leo shook his head. "Not really. My mom cleans offices downtown. She drops me at a friend's when she works late. But last night, I stayed out too long, and then it rained." Ethan nodded slowly. "And you didn't want to leave the kitten behind?" "Couldn't. Leo said simply. It was scared. Those words pierced deeper than they should have. Ethan saw something of himself in the boy. The part that used to care before money hardened him. He looked away, fighting the sting behind his eyes. Leo, he said after a pause, how would you like to help me fix something today? The boy grinned. Like what? Ethan smiled faintly. A mistake. A really big one. They drove back toward the city. The kitten nestled in Leo's lap. As the skyline grew closer, Ethan felt something inside him shifting. Fear, maybe, or hope disguised as it. When they reached his company's headquarters, security looked stunned. No one had seen him in days. He walked through the lobby with Leo by his side, ignoring the whispers that followed. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened onto the top floor, his assistant, Nora, nearly dropped her tablet. Mr. Cole, we thought that I disappeared. Ethan said quietly, maybe I did, but not anymore. He walked into the boardroom, where half the executives were mid-argument. The noise stopped instantly. Ethan stood at the head of the table, every eye on him. I owe you all an apology, he said, voice steady but soft. Not for the business, for the way I forgot it was built by people, not numbers. There was a silence heavy enough to feel. Some faces looked confused, others skeptical. But one, Nora's, softened. I made decisions that hurt lives. Laid off good people because it was easier than facing my own greed. He paused, meeting their eyes. That ends the day. He placed a stack of papers on the table, re-employment forms, reinstatement for dozens of workers he dismissed. Gasps rippled through the room. Sir, the board won't. The board will listen, Ethan interrupted calmly. Because if I could build this company once, I can rebuild it the right way. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly again, not violent this time, just distant, like applause from the heavens. Ethan turned toward the window. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a reflection, a woman's silhouette standing just behind him, smiling faintly. Grace, watching, approving. He closed his eyes and whispered, Thank you. By the time Ethan left the building, the city was alive again, but this time it didn't feel like noise. It felt like music, the kind of music that plays after a long silence. He stepped onto the sidewalk, Leo close behind, the kitten's tiny head poking out of the boy's jacket. For once, the cameras didn't flash for his car or his clothes. They flashed for something else. The story of the billionaire who came back human. He wasn't sure how the word had spread so fast, but news vans already lined the street, reporters shouting questions. Ethan didn't answer any of them. He simply smiled and said, There are more important people to talk about today than me. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder and guided him toward the car. The boy looked up. You really think you can fix everything? Ethan smiled faintly. Not everything, but I can start with one thing at a time. They drove back toward Haven Street, the road now bathed in sunlight. Ethan's phone buzzed nonstop, messages from his PR team, investors, even strangers. Some accused him of a publicity stunt. Others called it redemption. But for the first time, Ethan didn't care what anyone believed. He just cared that something inside him finally felt right. When they reached the small house, the candle on the table had burned completely down to wax. Yet the room didn't feel empty. It felt complete. Ethan sat by the window again, the light filtering through the old curtains. He pulled out Grace's notebook and opened to the last page. There, in faint ink, a final line shimmered, one he hadn't noticed before. When you finally learn to give, that's when you begin to live. He exhaled deeply, whispering, I get it now, Grace. He turned to Leo. How's the kitten? Leo grinned. She's better. I think she likes it here. Ethan nodded. Then maybe she can stay. This house could use a little life again. The boy's smile widened. Can I come visit her sometimes? Ethan looked at him, the messy hair, the honest eyes, the kind of heart that didn't need teaching, and said softly, Anytime you want, Leo, anytime. They spent the afternoon cleaning the place, sweeping dust, opening windows, letting the air move freely again. Each corner of the house seemed to breathe easy with them. As sunlight spilled across the floor, Ethan found himself laughing, not the polite, practiced laugh of a man used to cameras, but the real one, the kind that shakes off years of silence. When the sky began to turn gold, Leo's mom arrived, tired but smiling. She thanked Ethan, embarrassed by the trouble. Ethan shook his head. He didn't cause trouble. He reminded me what goodness looks like. She blinked, holding back tears. You're not what I expected, Mr. Cole. Neither am I, he said softly. After they left, Ethan sat alone again, the evening light painting the walls in warm tones. He picked up the phone and called Nora. So, she answered, still hesitant. Cancel tomorrow's investor dinner, he said. Instead, set up a meeting with the employees we let go. I want to talk to them personally, not as their boss, but as someone who forgot what their work meant. There was silence on the other end, then a quiet, emotional yes, sir. Ethan hung up, leaning back in the chair. He didn't need Grace's voice anymore. He could hear it inside him now. The whisper had become conscience. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes by the window. They rang softly, almost in rhythm with his heartbeat. He closed his eyes and smiled. You were right, Grace. It's not too late. And somewhere, in that gentle hum of wind and memory, he thought he heard her laugh again, light, distant, but full of peace. Days passed, and Ethan found himself waking earlier than he ever had. Not to emails, not to stock updates, but to sunlight spilling across Grace's curtains. The house felt alive again. He had started repairing it, board by board, as if fixing the walls could somehow fix the cracks inside him too. Each nail he hammered, each floorboard he replaced, carried a quiet sort of healing. The neighbors, at first wary, began stopping by. Some offered help, others brought stories. An old woman from across the street said softly, Grace used to talk about you, you know. Said you had a good heart, just lost sight of it for a while. That simple sentence nearly undid him. Ethan smiled through wet eyes. I think she was right about both. He spent his days differently now. He visited shelters he once ignored, called back foundations he ghosted, and reopened the children's hospital fund Grace had once helped him start. This time, there were no photographers, no stage speeches, just quiet work, real work. At night, he'd sit by the window, candle lit, notebook beside him, and talk out loud to the empty chair across from him. I did what you said today, Grace, he'd whisper. It felt peaceful. And sometimes, just sometimes, the candlelight flickered in reply, as though she were listening still. One evening, as he drove through the city, he stopped at a traffic light and saw a man sitting on the curb, middle-aged, holding a cardboard sign that read, Just hungry. Anything helps. The world around him buzzed past, heads turned away. Ethan reached into his wallet, but his hand paused. He stepped out instead. The man looked up, startled. So, Ethan crouched beside him. What's your name? Michael, the man whispered. Ethan handed him a sandwich he'd picked up earlier. You don't owe me anything, he said. Just promise you'll eat. Michael smiled faintly. You're not like most rich folks. Ethan chuckled softly. I used to be, until someone reminded me what being human feels like. The light turned green, cars honking, but for that moment, Ethan didn't care. He felt alive, like every breath had purpose again. Later that night, he returned home to Haven Street. The air was cool, gentle. Leo was there again, feeding the kitten. He looked up as Ethan walked in. Hey, Mr. Cole. The kitten's name is Hope now. Ethan smiled. That's perfect. They sat together on the porch steps as the stars began to appear, one by one. Leo leaned his head against Ethan's arm. You think people can really change? Ethan looked at the boy, his voice low but certain. Yes, Leo, not overnight, but one small choice at a time. That's how light comes back. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender again, Grace's scent. Ethan closed his eyes and breathed it in. He didn't need to see her anymore. She was everywhere, in the laughter, in the quiet, in the small acts of goodness that rippled outward. He turned to Leo. I think Grace would have liked you. Leo smiled. Who's Grace? Ethan's gaze softened. Someone who taught me that even when the world turns cold, kindness can still keep it warm. They sat there for a long while, watching the city lights shimmer like scattered hope. Ethan thought about all the voices he'd silenced over the years, employees afraid to speak, friends he'd ignored, people he'd dismissed. And now, in their place, one voice remained, not haunting anymore, but healing. Grace's, whispering through his memories like a prayer that never stopped being said. He whispered back, "I hear you, Grace. I hear you." The kitten purred softly, curling up between them. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, slow and steady. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had finally found peace. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Tap like, not for me, but for Grace, for Ethan, for every soul still trying to find their way back. One click can be your way of saying, "I felt this." A week later, the city was quieter than usual. The storm clouds had finally given way to wide skies, and sunlight stretched across the skyline like forgiveness finally finding it home. Ethan stood in the middle of a small park, where a new plaque was being unveiled. The inscription read, "The Grace Foundation, built on kindness, restored by love." It was the first charity he'd started again, dedicated to helping children from struggling families get education and shelter. The same dream Grace once whispered about over cheap tea and second-hand hope. He looked around the crowd, employees, neighbors, even old board members who once doubted him. And there, standing beside him, was Leo, holding the little kitten in his arms. As the ribbon was cut, applause rippled softly through the park. Ethan didn't feel like the billionaire on stage. He felt like the boy in Grace's photo again, a boy who once knew how to love without needing a reason. When the crowd began to thin, Ethan stayed behind. He walked to a quiet bench near a tree and sat down. The wind rustled through the branches, carrying with it that faint, familiar scent of lavender. He smiled, eyes glistening. "You see, Grace," he murmured, "you were right. The voice I kept running from wasn't haunting me. It was trying to save me." For a moment, he thought he saw her, sitting beside him, not as a ghost but as a memory made real. Her smile was soft, her presence warm, and her eyes reflected the peace he'd spent a lifetime searching for. "You finally learned," she said gently. "The richest heart isn't the one that owns the most, but the one that gives without asking." He nodded, voice trembling. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Grace's image seemed to shimmer, her voice fading like sunlight melting into dusk. "Now it's your turn, Ethan. Don't stop passing it on." The wind lifted her words and carried them away. And though she was gone, Ethan felt her everywhere, in the laughter of children nearby, in Leo's grin, in every soft whisper of kindness that now filled the silence she'd once haunted. He leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes. The city around him buzzed with life again, not as a machine of money but as a rhythm of hearts. Later that evening, he walked down Haven Street one last time. The house looked alive, windows open, flowers blooming along the porch. He decided to keep it that way, a home for anyone who needed it. The sign on the gate now read, "Grace House, where lost souls find home." Ethan paused at the door, looked inside one last time, and smiled. The kitten meowed from the windowsill as Leo chased after her, laughter echoing through the air. He whispered, "That's the sound of life again." As the sun sank behind the buildings, he watched the sky paint itself gold and pink. Colors that once seemed distant now felt personal. He pulled out Grace's notebook, the pages now weathered from his hands, and wrote on the final empty page, "I used to think success was about climbing higher than everyone else. Now I know it's about reaching back to lift someone up. Thank you for showing me the way, Grace." "Ethan." He closed the book gently and placed it on the windowsill beside the candle stub. The breeze from the open window caught the flame of a match he struck. The candle flickered to life one last time, warm and steady. Ethan smiled and whispered, "I'll keep the light burning, for you." The whisper of wind that followed almost sounded like laughter. He stepped outside, locking the door behind him, not with grief but with gratitude. For the first time, he didn't fear silence anymore. He understood it. Silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was a space where truth finally speaks. As he walked down the street, his footsteps steady, he glanced at the sky and said softly, "You were right, grace. Love still wins. The world, for once, felt beautifully still.